2 days ago I worked a night shift. I don't drive, but I live 15 minutes walking from my place of work. I live next to a cemetery, and around here they don't put lights on many power poles in cemeteries, so there are no street lights on most of my walk. The night was extremely quiet, all the town shops were closed, no bars around, so the streets were empty. I shared my phone location with my boyfriend and my best friend when I began walking because I had a bad feeling. The darkness was cut by a few porch lights while I walked. My footsteps sounded like they were echoing. There were slightly offbeat sounds between my steps. I stopped and looked back quickly. No one was there. I continued to walk and the sound started again. I looked back again and the sound stopped. Lights from a porch illuminated a pair of feet behind a car on the street. I was 3 houses down from mine. I booked it. I never knew my tiny legs could run so fast. The steps were behind me. I threw my door open so fast it hit my wall and I slammed it, locking both locks and flipping off all my lights and putting a chair underneath my doorknob. It didn't seem like anyone was behind me anymore, but this person now knew where I live. I sat on my floor quietly crying, holding my hamster in my lap for a minute as I tried to calm myself. My home is a separate garage apartment outside a house. It is very quiet usually, the only noises really being my hamster, and my hamster was asleep by 5 AM. I heard rustling around my home all night. At 5:30 AM I heard knocking on my door. No voices or anything, just a few knocks and shuffling, then more rustling around the house. My boyfriend came by to check on me that morning and my doormat was moved, but nothing else was too amiss. I didn't call the police, but there's good reason. The police are shared with multiple cities, so they usually don't come to or show up late. I just wanted to go to bed and stay quiet. Guy who followed me home, let's not meet again. I went shopping in a different city one day. I don't mind walking, so I walked from the train station to the mall. It was a short walk of about 10 minutes. As I had never been to that city, I used Google Maps to find the way. The shortest route was through a few alleys. I was alone. I always try to stay aware of my surroundings, and I quickly saw that 2 men were walking about 5 meters behind me. They spoke a language which I couldn't understand. I didn't think too much of it, as it was a bright day and we were in a public place near stores and still quite close to the train station. As I continued my way to the mall, the men kept walking behind me and slowly started to get closer to me. They had followed me for over 5 minutes now. They were just a few steps away from me once I had reached the alley. Instead of just walking on, I decided to enter the nearest store because I felt really unsafe. The store was a board game store, which was pretty cool. I decided to stay in there for a while until the men were gone, but they didn't leave. They waited outside. I stayed in the store and pretended like I was looking at stuff, and after a few minutes the men came in. They looked at me and started talking to the guy who was working at the store. I froze but stayed right where I was. One of the guys pretended that he wanted to buy a special deck of cards and the other one kept looking at me. They didn't buy anything and left after what felt like an eternity. I waited a few more minutes and the guy working at the store asked me if I was okay. I told him I felt like I was being followed by the men and I left once I thought they were gone. I continued my walk to the mall and got into the store safely. I found some clothes and suddenly I spot one of the 2 men. He immediately reached for his phone when he saw me. I went into the fitting room to hide out. I stayed there for over half an hour until I had to go home. Nobody could come to pick me up, so the journey home was really scary. I never saw the men again. I'm a student and I live with 3 other people in a house in a quiet town about a 20-minute walk and bus journey away from the university. By quiet, I mean that there are no clubs or anything, and our neighbours are mostly retired folks and young families. Our house is the exception to the rule. There isn't an enormous homelessness problem around where we were, but it is massive in the next town over. This happened in February, so not that long ago. So one Wednesday night, one of my housemates decided that she wanted to go to a club night event that they have every week at the university. Initially she had said that she was planning to stay at one of her friend's houses, but apparently this friend hooked up with someone pretty early on, so she was going to come home after all. Being the good introvert friend that I was, I told her that I'd wait for her to get back before I went to bed, since I was the only one in the house that evening. The others were at their boyfriends or visiting home. I wanted to make sure that her drunk ass got into bed safely. She told me that she wouldn't be too late and that she'd definitely be back by midnight, which was good since that's when they turn off the street lamps in our street. This makes everything pitch black and terrifying. I accidentally discovered this one day, though fortunately I had a torch on me at the time. This will be important in a second. I was sitting at the kitchen waiting while my housemate messaged me her progress, when the bus arrived, when it dropped her off at our stop, etc. Finally she messaged me that she was in our street and I got up to unbolt and unlock the door. Thank God for secure locks. By this time it's actually 5 minutes past midnight, since apparently drunk girls don't walk remarkably fast, so the street lamps are all off. But she's already in our street and the hallway light was on, so I wasn't too worried about her finding her way. When I open the door, my housemate is making her way merrily up our driveway, so I patiently hold the door for her. Just as she reaches the bottom of our stairs, I notice some guy turning into our driveway, completely perpendicular to the path. There was no logical reason to do this other than to come to our house. My heart stopped and I basically dragged my housemate into the house and slammed the door shut. I turned all of the locks, including the deadbolt, and stood about 6 foot back between my friend and the door as if it was about to swing open. After that, I closed all of the curtains on the ground floor and checked the other windows and doors were secure. Now, after that guy didn't knock or try to break down the door or anything dramatic, but all I could think was, how long had he been following her? And what would he have done if the door hadn't been shut when he reached it? Annoyingly, my drunk housemate was annoyed at me for pulling her in and apparently stretching her jumper. Now, she was pretty tipsy at this point, so her judgment wasn't 100%, but when I tried to sit her down and explain what I'd seen, she first insisted that I hadn't seen anything, and when I persisted, she said that it was probably just a homeless guy who wanted to ask for money. She then went to bed as if nothing was wrong, though she allowed me to keep the hallway lights on all night after a bit of persuasion. Anyway, since I knew the house was a fortress and that my housemate definitely wasn't planning to back up my story to the police, I let it go without reporting it. Honestly, she's halfway convinced me that I had imagined it or overreacted at this point. However, I still keep the door deadbolted whenever I'm alone in the house, even if it's the middle of the day. So, guy who might have been homeless, let's not meet. This happened just a few days ago while I was walking home from work. I live in a small rural community. It is a very safe, rather quiet town. I walk to and from work every day. I carry both a box cutter and pepper spray at all times. I feel rather comfortable walking at night and actually find it rather calming. It was about 10:15 on this particular night when I began my journey home. I had a very uneasy feeling that I couldn't place, and I decided to call my boyfriend. I knew he couldn't do much since he was at least 3 hours away, but at least he could call the cops if something happened. We talked and laughed as I walked along. Everything felt fine. That was, until I passed the Goodwill parking lot, which is the halfway point. I looked over and saw a man in his truck staring at me. I didn't think much of it. People can be odd, and maybe he was simply dozing. As I passed the parking lot, I heard the truck start up behind me. I felt a little uneasy, but just kept walking, thinking I was being paranoid. I should also note that there was a young man walking about 300 feet in front of me. He kept stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. Because of this, I walked slower than I normally would. I didn't want to catch up to him. Eventually he crossed the street and I began to pick up the pace. As I was about to reach the entrance to my neighborhood, the truck from before flew around the corner and stopped about 10 feet in front of me. He turned his truck so it was blocking the road. Now I was really starting to freak out. I told my boyfriend what was happening, and he told me not to worry, everything would be okay. I continued walking and watched as this man got out of his truck, standing in front of it and staring directly at me. I put my head down and tightly grasped my box cutter. I got closer and closer to the man, my breathing getting heavier and heavier. I could tell he was at least 6 feet tall, and as a streetlight shone down on him, I saw his arms bulge. I am a 5-foot, 18-year-old girl. Though I am not stick skinny, this man could have snapped me in two. Suddenly, a car came from down the street and maneuvered around the truck. About 30 seconds later, a second car followed suit, followed by a third. When the fourth car passed, I saw the man smack his fist on the car in frustration. He clumsily climbed back inside the truck and took a sharp U-turn, tearing out of the neighborhood with his tires squealing. If those cars had not come by when they did, I honestly don't know what would have happened to me. So, creepy man in the truck, let's not meet. This happened back when I was 17 and living in a small rural village. I had been at a friend's house all evening watching films and chilling. I leave to go home around 11 PM. It was quite a long walk back to mine, as she lived on the outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe, as when it got to a certain time of night it was quiet. You wouldn't bump into anybody, and there would be hardly any cars on the roads, especially at that late hour. It was weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with two big blocks of houses, like two big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and a vicarage. As I am passing the vicarage, I see this little beat-up red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it gets, the more it slows down, and the guy is nearly breaking his neck trying to look at me. I mean, there was nothing subtle about it. It nearly came to a full stop as it drew alongside me, and I started to panic. There was not another soul about, just me and this strange guy. I was determined not to get myself into a tiz, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I know, he drove off. I continued walking home, which was literally a 5-minute straight line from there. I kept listening out for a car engine and was vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing and saw nothing, so I breathed a sigh of relief as I could now see my house. I walked in and locked the door and saw my mum stood in the living room chatting on the phone. I'm trying to interrupt her conversation, telling her about the weird guy in the red car, when for some reason she goes to the front window and peeks through the curtain. She takes the phone from her ear and says, "What, that car?" This is all in a minute since walking through the door, and I'm thinking to myself it can't be him, because if he had followed me I would have heard the car. Before I even get a chance to look for myself, there is a knock at the front door, so I go and answer it, only pulling it open a few inches. There was this guy stood there empty-handed, wearing like a baseball cap. It was the same guy, the same car. I'm just like, what the fuck? I say, "Can I help you?"
Did you order a pizza?
He asks me, and I'm like, "No, I think you have the wrong house." Taking a step towards me, he says again in a not fucking around kind of tone,
No, I said, did you order a pizza?
Before I reply, my mum has come up behind me, opened the door fully, and says, "Is there a problem?" This causes him to back up, mumbling,
I must have the wrong address.
before he gets in his car and takes off. Sure to say, Mum and I were both a bit spooked, and we made sure everywhere was locked up properly. So, to this stealthy, alleged pizza guy who stalked me home, let's not meet.